Recently, I saw a headline on the Financial Post website, and it talked about how gas prices at the pumps could go to $2 a liter. And so today I'm pleased to be chatting with Canada's foremost expert on gasoline prices, Dan McTeague. He's the president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. He was previously a member of Parliament in Ottawa, and he also previously ran gasbuddy.ca, which was a website that allowed Canadian consumers to know what prices are at different pumps across the country. And I should also mention Dan currently runs gaswisdom.ca, where you can also see what's happening with fuel prices in different parts of the country. So Dan, thanks for taking a few minutes to chat with me today.
Good to be here, Colin. Thanks for the introduction.
So yeah, I saw the headline. I thought, wow, that's pretty crazy, because right now in Canada, typically it looks like Canadians are paying around $1.45 a liter for gasoline. That's obviously higher in on the West Coast in British Columbia, where they have more fuel taxes than that. But to go from where we're at to $2 a liter, that's a huge jump. How do you think that's possible that we could go from A to B? What could be driving that increase?
Well, Colin, let me say that when I spoke to the writer of that story, David Booth, last year, I told him there's a probability that we'd be seeing $1.30 to $1.35 for a liter of gasoline, and that we could see a scenario develop where we'll be upwards of $90, perhaps even $100 a barrel. Didn't quite get it on the barrel side, but we certainly did get it right on the gasoline side. If you consider last year we were 95 cents a liter to $1, and of course 6 months before that during the pandemic about 60 cents a liter, we've come a long way in a very short period of time. The fact that we're at 145 as an average, national average, going higher, has a lot to do with, I think, our underestimation and our lack of appreciation for fossil fuels. We've spent a generation, I'd say the past 20, 30 years, not just being mad at the cost of the product, but now saying the product is irrelevant in our everyday life. And of course, I'm not just referring to oil and its many, many multifaceted uses, which is ubiquitous in society. Also, natural gas. It's pretty important, not just for heating your home, but also power generation. And so, I think what's happened here has been, we've sort of thought about the Great Reset and the buzzwords, the Build Back Better and the green transition. All these are wonderful ideas, except that they have no basis in fact. And reality is that people need more energy now more than ever. And unfortunately, regions of the world that have been highly dependent on others for producing energy are short. Regions of the world that have gone heavily into so-called renewables, following this green agenda, Europe in particular, countries like Germany and UK find themselves in a real conundrum because they have invested so heavily in solar and wind energy as an alternative to coal, to natural gas, and to nuclear. What happens if the weather changes and it isn't so windy, or it isn't so it's cloudier more often than not? Yeah. Or demand goes up simply because of pent-up demand. There's a whole host of reasons why prices have gone up. Bottom line is, I think for many of us, maybe years of talking down oil and natural gas has come at a significant cost, which we're just starting to pay, and we're really at the beginning of this what I can consider this energy super cycle.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've seen a lot of efforts by people to stop investing in oil and gas, stop approving projects. We've seen, certainly here in Canada, pipelines getting rejected. Is that really sort of a big part of what's driving this? Is that sort of there's been this pressure to contain supply, and supply isn't keeping up with demand, and that's obviously driving up prices? Is that a fair?
Yeah, I think you're right, Colin. The country has tolerated a significant amount of over-regulation, stoppages, blockages, willingness to say we can do without extra pipelines, not just for oil, but for natural gas. We have really thought so little of this particular hydrocarbon that it's now, meant, the vanishing of $150 billion in capital in our number one economic engine, oil and gas. It's not manufacturing. Look, I'm here in Ontario. I have family that worked in the automotive industry all our lives. My father-in-law from the Ford plant here in Oakville. That's not the number one economic driver of wealth in this country. It is, whether you like it or not, oil and gas. And it isn't just important in terms of our exports and the countries that want our product. It's also important in terms of the wages it develops, the economic activity it creates, and the many flow downs from the oil and gas sector. I think here Ontario's manufacturing sector would come to a standstill if it were not for propane, if it were not for ethane, if it were not for natural gas, if it was not for plastics, if it was not for, I mean, we wouldn't even be able to fight a pandemic. I think the issue here for many is that Canada has lost its economic momentum at the very time in which it needs to get out of this rut, this pandemic created rut, pay down debt, get people back up and running. But it can't do so because it's basically said Canada's not in the business now of producing energy that the world desperately needs. And the real consequence is a lower standard of living for Canadians, less jobs, higher a Canadian dollar that isn't responding to the petrodollars we have in the past. So that means all of our commodities in this country, whether we make them here or not, are more expensive and are artificially so. Then we have the layering on of taxes and so on. So the cascading effect, the so-called trendy word knock-on effect, is pretty substantial, and it means a significant downgrade in Canada and the lifestyle and standard of living that Canadians have come to not just enjoy, but I think to a large extent, very clearly have taken for granted.
I think too about the damage to the environment. You've got so many countries that are using coal. Some countries are going back to coal because they need that power, whereas they actually want to be using natural gas, which is a cleaner burning fuel, which could reduce emissions, reduce smog, and so forth. And because we've been so obstructive when it comes to developing and exporting our natural gas, we're not able to provide that right now. So like I say, you end up with these countries using dirtier coal and emitting more. I want to just ask you about how much of this potential increase is due to government policies around taxation, particularly what many people call the second carbon tax, which is referred to as clean fuel standards. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
A year ago at this time, we coined the phrase the second carbon tax. And I'm glad to share it because it does amount to the same thing. It is the government, without much due regard to even environmental economists, saying you shouldn't try to mess up your first original carbon tax and the price signals that it tries to establish as a means of getting people to use less fuel or create less emissions. Complicating that with a second carbon tax known as a clean fuel standard is likely to have the opposite effect, very much like you referred to earlier, as people decide, I can't afford to do business in Canada, I'm just going to do it in another jurisdiction. No other nation that I know in the world has both a carbon tax and a clean fuel standard, but sure enough, on December the 1st, 2022, so by my calendar, that's just a little over 13 months, we're going to see an imposition of a carbon tax, a second one, a clean fuel standard, in which companies that produce energy, produce fuel, whether it's from natural gas or from, whether it's from gasoline or the product that they make has an emission as a refinery level, will have to pass those costs on to consumers. What does that mean? I'm using the federal government's own formula in terms of the, I'm using, not to be technical, but it's the federal government's own regulatory formula, and it says it's 16 cents a liter. And that's for gasoline, 19 for diesel. So, and that's over and above the increase in the first tax, which between now and 2030 will represent fully another 34 cents a liter when you consider HST, GST being applied to the 29 cents a liter, in which increased prices will impact. So starting next year, it gets very real. And it also, Colin, brings us back to the point of the article, which is it's easy to see how Canada could start marching, diligently towards $2 a liter. If that's the intention, which I believe it to be of our politicians, I have another way of responding to it, and that's calling what it is: demand destruction. And there are no viable alternatives. I'm sorry, but we can't all afford $120,000 Teslas or have battery electric vehicles heavily subsidized by the taxpayer be the way ahead, especially in the dead of winter when there's less efficiency. And I understand our willingness to be new and be right on the right side of climate and all these other things, but we're going way too fast, and it's going to cost us in ways that most of us could not have possibly imagined 3 weeks ago when we went to the polls. Not, by the way, that there's a lot of choice. all parties represented in the House of Commons that were successful in the last election, all four of them, all five of them,
Mhm.
all support the clean fuel standard. So it's going to take a lot to wake up these politicians, all 335 of them.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because it seems like there's a real disconnect in this country when it comes to discussions about the environment and fuel costs and that. I mean, there's a lot of people that I think are happy with the idea of Canadians paying $2 per liter at the pumps, because then they think that's going to suddenly shift everyone's behavior and we're going to reduce emissions and so forth. But in reality, you still have moms and dads across the country that still have to drive their kids to soccer practice, people that live in rural parts of the country where they can't really avoid having to drive into the city for groceries or whatever, because maybe they're running a farm or whatever the case is. So you have a lot of people that can't suddenly shift. The technology's not there yet in terms of mass adoption. And even when it comes to, if you just think about vehicles, where's all this electricity coming from? If everyone suddenly starts buying electric cars, even if they could afford them, we don't have the infrastructure to support a mass increase in demand for electricity. So it seems like you have a lot of people that are making a ton of money as elected officials, or they're in academia or in government where they have these near guaranteed jobs. They're not facing the same challenges that the rest of society has faced during the pandemic. And for them, they might be able to handle $2 per liter, but it seems like for a lot of middle-class Canadians, that would still be punitive. Just one final question for you, and that is, do you have any thoughts about how this affects Canadians beyond what they pay at the pumps? You're based in Ontario. You have a lot of people in the manufacturing sector. What are they saying about rising fuel costs and how that's going to end up trickling down also into the prices that Canadians pay for goods at the store?
Yeah, look, just before the federal government proposed the clean fuel standard, we had put out that report last October, and it said that for every dollar in environmental benefit, the cost to society, to the country, would be $6. Mm-hmm. Now that's a cost benefit analysis the federal, provincial governments and other boosters never took into consideration. So if from the get-go you have to finally admit, and BC is now having to admit that, I don't want to get into great detail, but BC and John Horgan's government, which presides over the BC low carbon fuel standard, said, oh, no cost here. It's those oil companies are ripping you off 13 mystery cents. There's no mystery. As I said then, and I said before, and I'm saying now, that's actually the clean fuel standard. The only place in Canada where that's currently being tested, and which all parties want to see. By the way, the 4 maritime Atlantic provinces came out swinging against the clean fuel standard. They said, we can't afford this. We simply cannot afford this. This will have a detrimental effect on the poor, on provinces which have very little in the way of economic resilience. Most of them are in heavy debt. And if your poorest provinces are pleading with the federal government to back off on this, and no one's paying attention of any political stripe, currently in the House of Commons, then we have a problem. Where is this going to go? Look, the cascading effect throughout the economy is there, and it's not by some weird accident that we now see the bank governor, Tiff Macklem, saying, well, maybe this inflation thing isn't transitory. You think? When you despoil the most important economic lever you have, and you arbitrarily drive up prices, not just here in Canada, but globally, you wind up with not just only higher prices, but a weaker Canadian dollar, which is making really an energy crisis become more like an energy super cycle. And it's about to pretty much knock over and topple the middle class in this country. And I'm not speaking, in electric ways to try to get people to say, hey, let's take a look at this. We need to stop dead right now and say our priority is to get that sector up and running, get our oil, get our natural gas to countries that need it, because otherwise you're going to even defeat the green agenda. China's ready to open up even more coal. They're going to Inner Mongolia, they're going to Xinjiang province, they're doing all sorts of wonderful things. None of it has anything to do with taking into consideration climate targets. So we can do all we want, twist ourselves into a pretzel, but when the cost of living for Canadians increases by $1,000 to $2,000 a year on average, which is what is going to happen this year, right now, I think it's time for all of us to stop and wonder whether this is the right road to go down. Because I think for most Canadians, If I tell them right now that the heating bill is going up $500 this season alone, I think many of them are going to have to say, that's it, we're done. We have to choose between eating or heating. And in fact, eating is going to probably go up another 10 to 15%. So I don't know where the end is on this, Colin, but I do know that Canadians can't afford this. And we've been ringing the bell on affordability for some time. Take your energy sector and cherish it. Don't denigrate it. And for those people out there, teachers and others who think it's wonderful, paid, subsidized by the government to come out and find creative ways to destroy the sector, this is going to come back and bite them as well. Their pensions are at risk, their securities are at risk, our social programs are at risk, our inability to pay off our debts, all those things are there. So this is really a wake-up call for Canadians. You didn't take my advice before. I think you're going to start to pay attention now, because we're going to another 10, 15 cent a liter increase in prices between now and the mid part of 2022.
I think that's important takeaways. It's going to affect people one way or another. Maybe you don't have a car, so you're not filling up your vehicle every week or two with gasoline, but it's going to affect you and what you pay.
Yeah, big time.
Could affect your pension plan, could affect your investments, could affect maybe your job if you're in manufacturing or whatever. I got to say, Dan, I wish you had better news for us, but at the same time, I appreciate it, because you've been speaking out quite a bit on this, and it looks like your crystal ball has been pretty accurate so far. So
Colin, listen, without interrupting and I hate to doing that. In 2001 and 2003, I brought 2 energy rebates to Canadians. Mm-hmm. One member of Parliament can make a difference. It's time for members of Parliament, representatives, to wake up and to find creative ways to help their constituents, not find themselves in a situation where they help themselves to the friends and the trendy elites out there who are trying to push this agenda. We need creative solutions to deal with the crisis right before us.
Yeah, and I definitely think we could see some better policies to get at that end goal of helping the environment without costing Canadians a fortune, whether it's through their jobs or whether they're paying at the pumps and that. And if Canadians are interested in chatting with their members of Parliament about some potential ideas and what's going on, they're looking for data and that, could you just tell us how people can follow your work?
Yeah, very simple. Affordableenergy.ca is the website. We do a lot of blogs and work and interactive work there. I sometimes use some of the quick responses on Twitter at Gas Wizard, which is my handle. And of course, if you want prediction on prices 1, 2, and 3 days ahead, gaswisdom.ca. It's the very same thing I did in the days of Gas Buddy, and more importantly, before my job working and pioneering gas prediction for the country at tomorrowsgaspricetoday.com. So gaswisdom.ca. We're expanding that. Most of the cities in this country are covered, and at least it gives you a small hedge, a bit of a shield against these ever increasing prices.
Well, that's perfect. Thanks a lot for your time, Dan, and keep up the good work. And I look forward to continuing to follow and hear what you have to say on these issues.
Grateful for the time you gave me to do this. Thanks so much, Colin.
Thanks. All righty. I'm going to hit stop there.